This video is for the person who may be getting ready to jump into investing in a cow herd, but is not quite sure the best way to go about it on small acreage. This video is also for that person who may be like I was. You own a cow herd, but you're just spending way too much money to maintain it. I'm going to do a quick review on how money is made in the conventional commodity cattle system, how we as small-scale producers can really observe this system in order to develop something that is going to be either cost-effective or even maybe a little bit profitable for ourselves. And then I'm going to break down exactly how I'm raising grass-fed beef on my 30 acres, despite not owning a single cow, and what really went into my decision to get rid of all of my cows. By the way, I did make 6 videos on this topic of raising beef cattle small scale. I'm going to link that entire playlist in the pinned comment of this video, alongside my free guide, the Absolute Beginner's Guide to Raising Grass-Fed Beef. First up, understanding the 3 segments of the conventional commodity cattle system and how money is made on cattle, period. So the first segment of the commodity cattle system is the cow-calf producer. This rancher raises a herd of cows who then produce healthy calves for market. Those cows need to raise a calf that then sells for more than it costs to raise both for the year. So for an example here, if a cow weans a 500-pound calf that then goes off to market and sells for $2.50 a pound live weight, you earn $1,250 for that calf. In order to turn a profit, the cow-calf producer has to keep the expenses associated with raising that cow and that calf in the previous year under $1,250. Now, I'm going to put a little side note in here. This is typically really hard. I just cited a live weight price of $2.50 for a calf. And that is because we are at the peak of a cattle cycle, meaning we are seeing prices that are higher than they have been in a very long time, if not ever. But as we dip into the valleys of these cattle cycles, which do come fast and hard, typically a cow-calf producer considers himself very blessed to be getting $1.70 per pound live weight on a calf. The second segment of the commodity cattle system is backgrounding, and backgrounders buy those calves that we just talked about, which are at this point called stockers. They graze and supplement those stockers for 5 months, and the goal is for each one to gain about 300 pounds within that 5-month period of time. At that point, they are sold to feedlots as feeder cattle. And the profit in this particular segment is that backgrounder being able to add that 300 pounds to that calf as cheaply as possible. It's typically done on pasture. So for an example of how the backgrounder makes money, we're going to use that $1,250 500-pound calf. As a backgrounder, you take that 5 months and you grow him to 800 pounds. And you sell him for maybe $2.30 per pound live weight. You earn a gross total of $1,840 off of that feeder animal. That's a $590 difference. And you will make a profit as a backgrounder if you can keep all of the expenses within that 5 months on that animal under $590. The third segment of the commodity cattle system is the feedlot. And feedlots take those 800-pound feeders and they feed a ration of 80% grain to 20% roughage until that feeder is ready for slaughter. Now, the profit in feedlots lies in having access to grain and feed as cheaply as possible, which is why they are more commonly owned and operated by commodity grain producers. So basically the rancher's job ends where the feedlot begins. Now, this is a very simple, some may argue oversimplified look at the U.S. commodity cattle production system, but it does give you a general idea of how and when money is made in it. Payday comes whenever that cattle is passed on to the next segment of the system. And as you'll notice, the system has been segmented in such a way as to guarantee the rancher a payday at least once a year. Now, if you start up a cow-calf operation to finish your own beef, like I did, your first payday will not come until 36 months after your bull joins those cows. Something else to consider if you're going into cow-calf production on small acreage is that you need to budget 3 times the pasture that initial dry herd will need. So if you do like I did and buy 6 dry cows and a bull, you really need to have enough pasture to support 18 head total. The reason being is that a dry cow, one that is not lactating, is at its lowest nutritional requirement, and it's going to be eating as little as it ever will in its whole life. Once the calf is born, your cow will be eating the most that it will in its whole life. If you are raising that cow herd with the intention of producing food for yourself or meat for resale, you'll be raising those calves to around 24 months. And there will be a 9 to 12 month period where you have 2 sets of calves out of that cow that your land needs to support, or else you'll need to bring in a lot of extra inputs to support those animals. And for me personally, I found that slow of a cash flow exposed me to way too much risk. And by exposure to risk, I simply mean 36 months was way too long for me to continue to spend money before receiving any return. It also meant it was way too much time for unpredictable expenses to pop up. And with cows, unless you have an endless supply of pasture, those expenses pop up and escalate really quickly. In the process of going cow-calf on small acreage, I came to the understanding as to why most successful cow-calf operators operate on hundreds, if not thousands of acres, with hundreds or thousands of acres worth of lease land on backup. I had a few first-hand opportunities to learn as to why cow-calf is a higher risk on small acreage when you don't have these backup resources. So as an example here from my experience, I hit a major drought about 12 months into this 36-month establishment period. And at that point in time, I had 14 head. Once the grass was gone, that 14 head was eating 10 to 12 round bales per month. Round bales at that particular point in time, if they could be accessed, were between $100 and $120 per bale. And what happened at that point in time was that it was game over for half of my herd. But I held on to that other half of the herd for just one more year before selling every last cow and keeping only what would qualify as stalker cattle. I am now raising stalkers for grass-fed beef on my 30 acres and assuming the role of what would be labeled backgrounder and finisher if we were to go according to that conventional cattle production system. Now, here are 3 reasons as to why this works really well on my 30 acres and in my specific context. Number 1, I don't have the expenses or the demand on my resources that I did when I was maintaining those mama cows and that bull. Now, this offsets the cost of paying more for those stalker cattle. Number 2, raising stalkers, I don't have a need for any heavy machinery or equipment. When I buy those stalkers, they've already had all of the treatments that are typically administered in a chute system, and all that's left for them to do is graze. There's not to say that something crazy couldn't pop up, but in the past 4 years, it just hasn't as it pertains to the stalkers. When I was raising my breeding group of cows, I came up against a couple of situations where I really needed a head gate and a chute, but I didn't have it. And I foresaw that if I was to keep that breeding group, I'd probably need to invest in large cattle handling equipment. And number 3 is flexibility of stocking rate with stalkers versus cow-calf. Now, for example here, if I have larger demand for my grass-fed beef orders one year, I can just increase the number of stalkers that I purchased to put on my land. And ultimately, the biggest reason that I sold my breeding cows, despite the fact that the cattle market is red hot and people are making money on cattle right now, is that I don't see a future in beef cattle. This video specifically tells you how the commodity pork market crashed and how I believe that commodity beef will soon follow. Watch it next.